واحد اثنين واحد اثنين.
ايوه
فراس،
ما حصلت.
ما لقيت كرسي صح؟
مو بكرسي.
السادة الحضور كرما منكم بأخذ مقاعدكم. سيدات والسادة كرما بأخذ مقاعدكم للجلوس. السلام الملكي. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا
Welcome everyone. Peace be upon God. Your Excellency Mohammed Al Sheikh, the Minister of Education, Your Excellencies, the guests of Saudi Arabia from all the world, distinguished guests, it is our honor to start this conference with a citation from Quran.
المصباح في زجاجة الزجاجة كأنها كوكب دري يوقد من شجرة مباركة زيتونة لا شرقية ولا غربية يكاد زيتها يضيء ولو لم تمسسه نار نور على نور يهدي الله لنوره من يشاء ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس والله بكل شيء عليم.
أتمنى الصوت. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Peace be
الإعلامي
upon
سلطان
you.
الشهري أصغر
I am
إعلامي في الوطن العربي وعضو
Shehri
جمعية
and the
الإعلاميين.
youngest media
ما بين امتداد
working
التاريخ
person
العظيم
between the
والحاضر
history
المشرف.
of the
فأنا
presence,
أحمل بين يدي
me having in
نموذجا
between my
من أمل
hands a
مستقبلنا
model of
أضعه
our
بين يدي
future to
معنا.
put it in your hands, Your Excellency.
ومذ أسست فيها صعود لدولة
He's citing poetry right now.
للبلاد منورة سعودية
He's citing poetry right now and can't be interpreted. So the interpretation will pause for seconds.
رجال وحجم المرء فيهم بأمة جبال
Again, he's citing poetry and cannot be interpreted. So we are pausing the interpretation services for right now and will resume once we continue the conference.
الصواب مؤزرا رعى الله رؤيا بالسداد توسمت وألهاكم فيها الصواب مؤزرا ملكتم علينا بالرشاد فضائلا لباسا لكم في العالمين ومثرا تسوسون ملكا كالأسود وشأنكم
He's citing poetry. He's citing poetry and this cannot be interpreted. The interpretation services will pause for now. A leadership and vision, looking ahead, deep belief in the work of the nationals and to be interpreted to the world, to have such forum. The global trends in e-learning welcome everyone in this international event that is organized by Saudi Electronic University to be a new start of e-learning. Your Excellency, the Minister of Education, Your Excellencies, Your Excellencies, and dear distinguished guests. And now we have the speech of Professor Lilac Al-Safadi, the President of Saudi Electronic University. In the name of God, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, our distinguished guests, welcome everyone. Peace be upon you. The world today is experiencing rapid changes that have redrawn trends and reshaped the future. Perhaps these trends are accelerating the pace of innovation and knowledge and technical progress, and in addition to the new COVID and its changes, which has promoted e-learning and distance learning to be the experience of Kingdom Saudi Arabia, a pioneer of success in this. In light of the accelerating pace of change, we are witnessing an economic transformation, a change in labor market, a birth of a new generation, jobs, patterns, and work models, and a future of work which will happen by 2025, the replacement of 85 million jobs with AI technologies, rehabilitation of 33% of jobs shifted to remote work, and 50% of the workers, and other variables and changes. We are working a new era of work, comes need for new, and with new era of work comes the new type of education that keep pace with transformation. It is based on innovation, harnessing the latest technologies and adapting to changes. We need a tomorrow provide education adapted to the personal needs of all, a future that promotes self-education and lifelong learning. We are also witnessing a technological era that touches all sectors, including education, to exceed $400 billion of global education technology, including the augmented reality of $12 billion and $6 billion of AI technologies, in addition to other emerging technologies to keep up with the future. These technological advances have changed fundamental concepts in learning and created modern patterns in education, and an accelerated growth in e-learning estimated at 7 times the growth of traditional education, and the global market estimated a global education estimated at $1 trillion by 2027 in Saudi Arabia, to have the biggest share at the regional market of 35%. As you know, the provision of education is no longer monopolized by the institutions. Now it is a competition. We welcome you to see today of our innovation and the Electronic University, and it is organized by Saudi Electronic University. It is the first house experience in e-learning in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and hosted in Saudi Arabia to confirm its pioneer position in digital education at the regional and global level. We meet today to discuss trends that shape education and education that shapes trends, to exchange experiences and knowledges, and we get acquainted with the most prominent experiences and practices in e-learning, the latest emerging technologies in education, and modern education pattern. Let's explore together the future of online and digital education in the world. Our dignified guests, this forum confirms the determination of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and its leadership to achieve its goals to be among the most advanced countries in the field of innovation and e-learning, to be an incubator for thought leaders and change markets, and a destination for everyone who seeks to draw a better future for e-learning, and to contribute to achieving the goals of the Human Capacity Development Program, one of the programs of Kingdom's Vision 2030, which has launched by His Highness the Crown Prince to set the general frameworks to enhance the successes achieved in developing the education system and to transfer there towards a new future to achieve our country's ambition vision of building a globally competitive citizen. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my thanks and gratitude to our wise leadership. May God Almighty save our bless our country for the continuous and great support for the education sector has received. As I would like to also thank His Excellency the Minister of Education, Dr. Hamad bin Mohammed Al Sheikh, for his sponsorship of this forum, his honoring of attending this forum, and his constant keenness for innovation and to be an established value in the field of education. Also, thank you to all the partners, sponsors, and all parties supporting this forum for what they have provided, as they are part of shaping the future of education and anticipating its trends. The government agencies and the private sector agencies. I would like also to thank the speakers, participants of this forum, who are the experienced in the local and international. I would like to give a special thank to the organizers of this forum. Dear guests, today we are in Riyadh, where yesterday's dreams are reality today and distant tomorrow are close of being present. We meet today to imagine together an education that gives the learner access to a flexible, fun, and unique learning experience, an education that transcends the limits of space and time, to be present with the learner in his movements or her movements and a companion to their movements, an education that enables the learner to navigate between multiple learning styles and models and different institutions, and to have an e-learning that shapes the future. Thank you everyone. Thank you very much, everyone.
أصحاب المعالي والسعادة أيها
Your Excellencies,
الحضور الكريم.
dear guests,
الآن كلمة الإمام
now
الدكتور
we
عامر
are listening
محمد
to
وزير التعليم
His
برعاية حضرته.
Excellency,
فليتفضل.
the Minister of Education, the sponsor of this forum.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وبعد. أصحاب المعالي والسعادة ضيوفنا الكرام.
Dear guests, our dignified guests, peace be upon you. I'm glad today to welcome everyone in the capital of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh. Today we're celebrating the founding day of our dearest country by Imam Muhammad bin Saud, who built this country concerning and interesting with education, which started the main base and the core base of society development and its civilization. Our dignified guest, before setting the development of the objective development, which includes fair opportunity for everyone in education, KSA realized the need to increase the educational capabilities. And to achieve this, KSA launched many initiatives and programs to develop education system in all its levels, and this came along with the royal degree in 2011 by creating and establishing Saudi Electronic University with hybrid learning. Our dignified guest, anticipating and starting the future needs, Vision 2013, launched by the custodian of the two holy mosques, and is taking high care by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who set strategic objectives. Among these, to develop the outcomes of university opportunity and achieving competitions. KSA was able to success in electronic education through educational platforms, whether in the education or university education and technical education, which resulted the UNESCO organization to choose electronic university to set it and have it as the best practices in KSA, and KSA have been recorded on a global level in this aspect. Also, UNESCO had this calendar frame in electronic education through international studies for best practices internationally in electronic educational. Our dignified guests, electronic education have become accelerating, so we need to keep up with these changes and overcome these challenges with these 21st centuries and the industry development. And we have a huge responsibility that imposes to build the upcoming generation a very good educational system that presents innovation and sustainability based on flexible and solid educational purposes. Today we are gathering to discuss the requirement of educational learning, and we are anticipating the future changes, and we are glad to share the this ambitious goal with the professionals in this aspect, and we have high hopes in this to result in sustainable initiatives. One of the first these initiatives to establish a platform that make and produce electronic learning high quality, and having new motives for innovation that employs latest technology in education, whether in educational, in AI, or the large data and virtual reality and 3D, and contributing in the professors, trainers, and coaches in this aspect. In conclusion, I'd like to extend my thanks and appreciation for Electronic Saudi University in hosting and organizing this forum, and I'd like also to extend my thanks for the participants, and I have good faith in these great minds in contributing and achieving the goals of this forum, and resulting in unique outcomes that support the outcomes of education in KSA to achieve global success. Thank you. Your Excellency, we would like to award the pioneer participators. Blackboard, represented by Mr. Abdelaziz Asnaya.
بنك البلاد يمثله الرئيس التنفيذي الأستاذ
Bank of Al Bilad, CEO, represented by the CEO Abdelaziz Al Nizan.
كبار المتحدثين هم
one of the dignified and designated speakers, Mr. Andreas Schlischer, the special consultant of the policy of education of the International and Collaboration Institution.
الأستاذ
Mr. Jim Prigidar,
المدير العام لشركة بلاك بورد.
the general manager of Blackboard Company.
الأستاذ أندرو جيفريز الرئيس
Mr. Andrew Jeffries, CEO of Oxford for Business.
صاحب المعالي
His
تتشرف
Excellency
الجامعة السعودية الإلكترونية
Saudi Electronic
بتقديم درع
University
كريم
honoring
لمعاليكم.
to present a souvenir for Your Excellency.
شكرا لكم معالي
Thank
الوزير
you,
على
Your
تشريفكم
Excellency,
ورعايتكم
of
لملتقى التوجهات
honoring
العالمية
and
في
sponsoring
التعليم
this
الإلكتروني.
forum of
شكرا
global
لجميع
trends in
الحضور.
e-learning.
وننوه
Thank you for
بأنها
all
ستبدأ بعد
participants
قليل
and all
الجلسات العلمية
dignified
للملتقى.
guests. And we would like to point that the sessions of this the forum will be starting in a few minutes.
أصحاب المعالي والسعادة الحضور الكريم، نستأذنكم ببدء أولى الجلسات العلمية وهي التعليم
We are
الإلكتروني
going to
تجاه
start our
التعليم
first
المرن
panel
في عصر
today
عدم اليقين.
in the
يتحدث
first
فيها الدكتور أندرياس شليشر
Dr.
مدير التعليم والمهارات
Andreas
والمستشار
Schlischer.
الخاص لسياسة التعليم للأمين العام
works
لمنظمة التعاون
at the
الاقتصادي
UNESCO,
والتنمية، والأستاذ صبحي
and
الطويل من
Mr.
منظمة
Subhi
اليونسكو،
الطويل
والدكتورة بيكي
and
تاكيدا تنكر من
Dr.
ولاية
Becky
من مكتب ولاية كولورادو للتطوير
from
الاقتصادي،
Colorado
ويديرها
Office
الأستاذ
of
أندرو
Economic
جيفيرز
Development
الرئيس
and
التنفيذي لمجموعة
run
أكسفورد
by
للأعمال.
Mr. Andrew.
What's that? Great. Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andrew Jeffries, and I'm the CEO at the Oxford Business Group. And it's my pleasure to be moderating the first panel of the day entitled E-Learning Towards Flexible and Resilient Education in an Age of Uncertainty. Now, first, let me echo the welcome you have already heard from our speakers. Most of all, I think I speak for everybody when I say it's just so good to be here in person at this conference, to be back traveling, interacting, meeting face-to-face, sharing experiences. And it's great, of course, it's great to see so many people here in Riyadh, a capital that I first visited almost 30 years ago, and one that is undergoing huge level of change, rapid change, much of which is focused on digitization and on the harnessing of technology. In many ways, at the heart of the new Saudi Arabia is the extraordinary revolution that's been taking place in the education sector. No sector in Saudi responded faster and more efficiently during COVID, where so many countries struggled to provide any live lessons for millions of children in both developed and undeveloped markets. Saudi was able to ensure full online education within weeks of the lockdown. No single area of the country highlighted to the world just how far this economy has upgraded in recent years than its ability to maintain itself in the face of the pandemic. Now, the broader education story is a microcosm of what is happening across the globe, and this morning's discussion intends to take a microscope to this process of change. Now, before I introduce our panel of experts, I just want to say a few words of introduction. We've already heard from the Minister about the impact of COVID on the global economy in general and on education in particular. Indeed, UNESCO estimates that 1.5 billion students have been affected by school and university closures during the past 2 years. And even though we are now in what many call a post-pandemic or endemic phase of COVID-19, there continues to be significant disruption to the education sector. And yet, there are many positive long-term lessons to be drawn from policies originating in these most challenging of years, many of which will be in place for generations. We at Oxford Business Group cover 40 markets across Latin America, Asia, Africa, and the Gulf. In many of our markets, e-learning has gone from a fringe practice to a or the core element of the educational ecosystem. And if this change was driven by necessity, the e-learning experience that has emerged has several long-term advantages over traditional teaching. For many lecture-based classes, e-learning is a more flexible and efficient way to deliver educational material. A fascinating example is from Imperial College in London, which saw student satisfaction rise during the pandemic, the opposite of what was seen in so many other universities in the UK. Now, the success was driven by a philosophy to evolve rather than just transition the education experience. Ideas ranged from 3D virtual field trips to mini labs sent out to students to perform experiments at home. And in the end, these changes appealed to students and, at the same time, led to improving academic standards. But these changes are not just limited to the richer nations. Indeed, we've seen some of the most innovative education policies can come from low and middle income countries. Just as we saw in East Africa, leapfrogging Europe in mobile banking innovation in the late 2000s with M-Pesa, there are signs that we could see in countries with fewer resources leading the way. One particular example is the concept of the self-organized learning environment, known as SOLS, first pioneered by the University of Newcastle in rural villages in India, and now spread across China, Africa, and South America. Using this method, it has been found that children respond more positively to teaching each other using a single computer resource compared to being delivered class by a teacher in front of a chalkboard. And technology itself isn't always enough. As a recent UN paper highlighted, parents in developed countries can be fearful of innovation when it involves their own children. And it's often where resources are at their lowest that the greatest policy innovation will be accepted. But if EdTech embraces all income levels, it is also at its best when it combines the public and the private sector. We see this in the UK's ed sector, where the non-for-profit JISC, in partnership with the British government, launched its Step Up programme in 2019. Now, this initiative looks at providing emerging edtech startups with a direct access point for institutional decision makers to present their solutions, which the scale of resources do not currently allow. This will foster the upscaling of these firms' activities and solutions, which are considered particularly relevant to the UK government's broader edtech strategy. And once again, this private sector involvement is not just limited to high-income countries. In Mexico, the edtech startup Hola Code, for example, teaches migrants who were deported from the US or refugees how to code using the Hack Reactor bootcamp system developed first in Silicon Valley. Now, no doubt, there are challenges. The e-learning revolution relies very much on the digital revolution, which, however ubiquitous it is, has not reached many rural areas in the markets that we cover. And in the same vein, socio inequalities, even in the richest nations, mean that many students are unable to make the most of their full learning experience because they don't have the resources to acquire the relevant devices. So the stage is set. The last 2 years have seen an e-learning revolution. But how do we make sure that it's reliable, that it helps all social groups, and that it's able to continue in an unstable world? This seems a good time to bring in our panelists. We have two panelists joining us by Zoom, Dr. Becky Takeda Tinker from the Colorado State University Global, and Sobi Tawel of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. But first, I would like to introduce Professor Andreas Schleicher. Professor Andreas initiated the program of International Student Assessment, PISA, and other international instruments that have created a global platform for international policy makers, researchers, and educators to innovate and transform educational policies and practices. He's worked for over 20 years with ministers and educational leaders around the world to improve quality and equality in education. But perhaps most importantly, our own UK Minister of Education, Michael Gove, described him as the most important man in English education. Though, of course, he is German and he lives in France. No bigger accolade, I feel, can be given. So with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Andreas.
Assalamu alaikum, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. If I can have my slides here. These are difficult times for education, challenging times. Now, the pandemic has woken up our schools and universities to the digital age. That is going to be fundamentally transforming learning. And the one thing that we have learned is that the future will always surprise us. You know, climate change is going to disrupt our lives probably a lot more than this pandemic. And artificial intelligence is pushing us so much harder to think about what is human. The kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to assess, have become easy to digitize, to automate. And there are going to be lots of other trends that are going to shape the future of learning, the future of our societies, of our countries. And the forces are not difficult to understand. If you have a job that you can explain to somebody else in terms of routines and procedures, a computer is going to do that better than you anytime. Technology-intensive work is rising, and you put the two things together, you get a picture of the future of work. It's not so difficult to understand. Now, you know, some people say, well, you know, the digital world has become the real world, and it's true for young people. Here you can see young people in OECD countries spend 30, 40, sometimes almost 50 hours online. The digital world is the real world for the next generation, certainly out of school, out of university. But, you know, that doesn't mean that we are digitally skilled. And I want to share with you as well, when we actually assess the capacity of young people to navigate complex information, to distinguish fact from opinion, to triangulate. You can see there's only a few countries where the majority of young people are equipped for the digital world, have those kinds of skills. I mean, the majority of people in most countries have actually quite limited digital skills. Yeah, they can all operate a mobile phone, a tablet, a laptop, but that doesn't mean that we have those skills actually to master the technologies of our times. If you do not understand the nature of an algorithm, you're going to become the victim of an algorithm. We have to work on this. We have to not only develop the technology, but actually the human capacities to make sense out of that technology. And part of this has to do with mindset. People have always predicted, the performance of education by the money we spend or the time we spend, but actually the mindset of young people is one of the strongest predictors of the quality of learning. You can see on the right side a country like Estonia, one of the world's most advanced education systems, is a country where most students believe, if I study hard, if I try, I'm going to help, and I'm going to be successful. You take a country like Indonesia, where actually many, many students struggle. But now to the digital world. The digital world not only changes the skills we need to be successful, but it also changes the way in which we learn. Learning can become so much more granular, so much more personal, so much more interactive. That's the promise of artificial intelligence. As an educator, you can understand how different students learn differently and embrace that diversity with differentiated educational practices. You can detect what students learn. You can basically diagnose student learning, and you can build your responses, your learning systems on that data. That's the promise. You can look at a range of, information streams today. You can not only see what students do, you can observe how they behave, you can learn from the learners and then adapt their curriculum. That's the future of learning. We can make learning so much more engaging, so much more interesting for young people. No? Why should you listen to a teacher who explains to you the results of an experiment when you can do that experiment in a virtual laboratory? No? That is the promise of our times. Classroom analytics can make the visible invisible. You can see their classroom as a digital system, where actually students become the generators of information, of insights for the systems, and educators get really strong data, strong information on the learning strategies of individual students. It's becoming a reality. Students are no longer anonymous figures in the classroom. They become subjects, they become sources of information, of insight for people. Teachers can, monitor, intervene. University professors can use and share information. They learn a lot about themselves in those digital ecosystems. Now, the most controversial topic is, will robots take over education? And the answer is, well, technology can super empower educators. It's not going to replace them. It's going to make the work of educators so much more interesting. Knowledge transmission, probably, educators are not going to be very successful to compete with, technology over a long time. Technology is so much better at this, but people need a good coach, a good mentor, a good facilitator. That's the nature of learning. Learning, we shouldn't forget, is not a transactional business. It's always a social, a relational experience. But, let's come back to robots. We've actually seen that, particularly for young children, actually, robots can engage them in the learning. Basically, you can see language learning as a great example. You do not learn a language if a teacher, teaches in front of you and tells you something. You learn a language by speaking, by doing things. Robots are great at that. They can actually change those pictures. We have also good data. The best way you learn is not when someone teaches you. It's when you teach someone. In a traditional university, in a classroom, very hard to do. But again, technology allows us to do that. And we have amazing data from Japan where actually the learning gains were so much superior to the passive learning that we usually do. This active learning is so important. And then, of course, there's telepresence, many, many devices that change the future. The last point I really want to make is about assessment. One of the biggest mistakes we've made in education is to divorce learning from assessment. We ask university students to pile up 3 or 4 years of learning, and then one day we ask them to come back and, tell me everything in a very constrained, contrived, artificial environment. And that has, made learning so shallow and so reactive. Well, today with technology, we can reintegrate learning and assessment. We can make, the learning process, the process of assessment. While you study, you get those signals. No? That's what makes computer games so attractive to people, because it is that assessment process. I learn something about myself. That's the future of learning as well, the integration of learning and assessment. Of course, we need to learn certain lessons. The technology, the best technology is actually the technology that is invisible, that is just supporting the learner, that is just sort of in the background. Technology should not distract us, but it should really support us. And that's really, I think, what we see increasingly. We need a more holistic approach, and Andrew, you mentioned that point as well. We need to ensure that technology reaches different people in different ways, embraces the diversity in our societies with really very responsive ways. And that is, for me, the promise of technology, that it can actually understand how different people learn differently and then engage with this in a very differentiated way. Of course, the biggest question for all of us is, what is the right balance? On the left side, do we focus on people who just, deliver education? On the right side, do we completely rely on technology, or do we sort of try to mix the two, the kind of blended learning experience, the kind of technologically and the social? And that's probably a hard question for us to answer. Where do we strike that right kind of balance to get things together? And of course, at the end, it's always a balancing act. We need to reconcile the urgent in the pandemic with the important, to build education strategically. We need to find the right balance between modernizing education, changing it, and disrupting it. Both forces are important for change. We need to reconcile new goals in education with our current structures that will only change very slowly. We want to educate globally minded learners, but they still need to be locally rooted in their culture, in their traditions. If you lose, that floor under your feet, you end up going to build walls around you. That's not really healthy for others. We want to foster innovation in an education culture that is, very much risk averse. Yes, we all like innovation, but maybe not for our own children. We need to realize potential with the reality. And finally, and I think this conference is a good example, we need to not solely rely on the virtual, but integrate the virtual with the real experience of humans. Thank you very much. Shukran.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Andreas. I like the line, if you don't understand an algorithm, you will be its victim. I think that's my first learning of the morning. And I think it's fascinating to see how far forward countries like Estonia are in many ways than countries like the UK, where I am from. But an inspiring few minutes and a lot for us to think about. But I'd like to move on now to our next speaker, Sophie Tarwell, who's Director of the Future of Learning and Innovation Team at UNESCO. Dr. Supi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrew. شكرا. معالي الوزير، سيداتي وسادتي وحضور الكريم، يشرفني أن أقدم لكم بعض الأفكار حول مستقبل التعليم والتربية من وجهة نظر يونسكو. Ladies and gentlemen, so very pleased to have this opportunity, share a few thoughts from the work that UNESCO has been doing on the futures of education. And perhaps the first point to say that much of the discussion, debate, discourse on the future of education is about adapting to the future. It's focused on the changes that we need in what we learn, in how we learn, increasingly in the context of the digital transformation of our societies, also the questions of where and when we learn. So questions of method, questions of content, questions of place and time, but very little in at least the literature that we have reviewed on why we learn and the purpose of education. What type of society, what future are we aspiring to? And this to say and to connect to the recent report of the International Commission on the Futures of Education, released its report in November of last year, under the title Reimagining Our Futures Together, a new social contract for education. And that the report of that international commission starts by looking at the why question. And it frames our present around a dual challenge, if you want. Our present is one foot in the past, and our present is one foot in the future. And the foot in the past is the unfulfilled promises, if you want, despite the great advances we have made in expanding educational opportunity. We see it in enrollment and participation rates at all levels of education across the world over the past decades, narrowing the gender divide. We have seen a doubling in the last 20 years of the numbers of students in higher education. But yet, we still have persistent exclusions, challenges around access, just looking at still important numbers of out of school children and youth, issues around quality and the acquisition of basic foundational skills, the ability to learn to read and understand at the end of a basic schooling cycle, at the end of primary, at the end of lower secondary, issues around relevance of education, and we see that also in high dropout rates in many regions. And just to take one figure, the 50% completion rate in upper secondary education that we observe worldwide would tend to indicate that there are issues around also the relevance of education. And we know that COVID-19 has further aggravated these disparities. So that's a one foot in the past, the persistent challenges despite the progress in expanding educational opportunity. But the foot in the future is the disruptions that Andreas just referred to, the disruptive change, the multiple possible futures, accelerated technological change in the realm of the digital, but also in bioethics and acceleration. level. So there has been a positive shifts. There have been leaps forward. There has been much innovation, although it remains to be seen how much of that has been taken to scale. But we also know that there have been, it has laid bare the COVID educational disruption, the inequalities, and has widened some of the disparities in access to infrastructure, to connected devices, sometimes barriers of cost, but also in use. And Andreas mentioned very rightly so the challenge of inadequate digital skills. And actually, an early survey that UNESCO conducted during the in 2020, during the period of the lockdowns, one of the major barriers that was reported by educational authorities to the rollout of remote learning was the lack of adequate digital skills among young people, even more so among parents, among teachers, and finally parents. So challenges around access, but also use, and issues around appropriate and safe and meaningful use of the digital. I'd like to just end with three ideas around steering the digital transformation of education. They have to do with work that culminated in a declaration on connectivity in education, and three central principles. The first, in terms of approaching the digital divide, whether in its human or its technical dimensions, that we center the most marginalized. Most edtech innovation often benefits more privileged learners, teachers, and communities. And if we were to center the most marginalized in these innovations, lower income groups, learners with disabilities, those in remote areas, migrants, then we reverse the perspective. What would work with the most disadvantaged in terms of digital innovation and education would be fairer and easier to scale out. Second, that we need to strengthen public education, digital education platforms and content. The question of connectivity, there was a lot of discussion over the past few years around the challenges of the digital divide and connectivity. But connectivity in education is connectivity for what purpose? To what? We need the adequate resources, digital pedagogical resources, differentiated by age, aligned with national standards, quality assured, and in one go-to place. I think what we've seen in countries that did not have robust digital education systems, we saw scrambling to try to get, from a fragmented offer of what was out there in terms of learning materials and learning resources to try to deal with the disruption of schooling. So a one entry public platform of digital education with nationally quality, nationally aligned and quality assured resources. And third, that the digital transformation of education requires pedagogical innovation. And we need new paradigms. And very often what we have seen in some countries is that digital learning is seen as replicating school learning or conventional learning online. There is great potential, as Andreas was saying, to innovate, to have more interactive and creative learning experiences. And it's not always around the idea of individual access of one learner to one device. There are interesting ways of doing more collaborative pedagogy, of connecting groups of learners across space. And a final word on innovation, and I'll stop here. a bit of a provocation, but we have, we all underline the need for strengthened digital skills in today's world, digital skills for learning, that teachers need to be strengthened in their digital skills, that students need to learn to navigate safely, meaningfully the internet, because it's permeating all facets of our lives. And yet at key moments of validation of learning, high-stake examinations, in most cases, we prohibit access to the internet as a knowledge resource. So while we use internet daily for leisure, for communication, to socialize, to work, to study, at a key moment of validation of learning, we most often prohibit access to the internet. And that reflects the need for shifting the paradigm in assessment, and that's the point that Andreas was also making, assessment as a strategic area of intervention to innovate and to improve the quality and relevance of our teaching and learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sopi, and an inspiring few minutes. I think the emphasis on ensuring access, the fact that we have to be reminded 50% of people do not finish higher education, is key to making sure this revolution achieves all of its goals. Our final speaker, Dr. Becky Takeda Tinker, blends her passion for education with her experience in non-profit governance and has for over 20 years experience of business leadership, most recently as president and CEO of Colorado State University Global. Now CSU is America's first and only 100% online, fully accredited state non-profit university. Dr. Becky, the floor is yours. Okay, now we're having an issue hearing you. I'm not sure if that's us or you. Let's try again.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
All right, very good. Well, due to the impacts of COVID, the world as we knew it has been forever changed. What researchers have been projecting for the year 2030 is in fact already here now and is moving very quickly. During COVID, our need to continue economic activity with or without human workers has been clear, as we saw industries, companies, and organizations around the world integrate technology wherever possible. And as we are already aware, the pace of technological change is exponential, which drives faster product and service life cycles, which means overall change in our lives and in the workplace will be faster and unceasing into the future. Also an impact of COVID, in addition to the pre-pandemic top industries driving economic growth, we now see substantial growth in other industries such as renewable energy, healthcare, and environment, which has dramatically increased our demand and needs for an educated workforce. And in the US and around the world, we also now have an increased sensitivity to ensuring that all individuals have an equal chance for prosperity and a quality of life. While the impacts of COVID present significant challenges, we are fortunate to also know from experience and outcomes data that e-learning can successfully address them. Through technology-delivered education, lifelong learning can be a reality for busy professionals as they continually upskill and reskill to keep up with the changes in their industry and their organizations. E-learning allows for flexibility from time and place, saving time driving, parking, even walking to class, to help ease the burden for a focus on skills and knowledge acquisition. It makes keeping up with change feasible within our same 24 hours of time. E-learning also allows for courses to be customized for individual learning experiences, as already shared in detail from Andreas and with Mr. Sohai. As they shared, we know that e-learning allows for alternative pathways to be built and integrated to help facilitate the acquisition of skills and knowledge needed for more advanced subjects. When those pathways are built into online courses at a click of a mouse, learners can address the additional information they need to brush up on any given subject matter so they can advance in the content and to help keep up with the rest of their classmates. We also know that e-learning platforms allow for the integration of artificial intelligence systems. Such systems can be used for real-time outreach. For example, when a student has a lengthy pause in attempting to respond to questions, or that so learning can become progressively more difficult or easier depending on learner performance. E-learning accompanied by tools for individual learning, such as AI, provide a truly customized learning experience for each learner. That ability will help us provide a more equalized opportunity for learners at all levels and backgrounds so that they can excel and then truly succeed in the workforce. In Colorado, I now work with the Office of Economic Development and International Trade and our governor's office to help ensure that the COVID recovery funds provided by our federal government are invested for the state's current and future economic success through the Department of Higher Education and the Department of Labor and Employment. In my role, I am working to ensure that education and learning is increasingly tied to workforce-related needs in support of economic development so that while we may have separate departments, they unite around the one goal of Colorado's ongoing economic prosperity for benefit to the state and most importantly for our Colorado residents. So when I heard Mr. Sohai talk about the relevance of education online or face-to-face, in my worldview at this point in time and in the work that I do, it is about economic development and prosperity for all. So in my work, starting with high school, we are working to more broadly provide juniors and seniors in 11th and 12th grade the opportunity to enroll in apprenticeships and other work-based learning programs, trade school classes, and dual enrollment courses for high school and collegiate credit. The goals of those activities conducted either online or face-to-face is to help make those years meaningful towards postgraduate livelihoods as they acquire the formal credit needed to complete their high school educations. Earning while learning, and depending on the program selected, have the opportunity to secure collegiate credit for a jump start into certificate and degree completion. Additionally, our post-secondary institutions are being encouraged and motivated to review all learning experiences, online, face-to-face, for credit evaluation that stacks towards certificates and degrees. Just because a course wasn't taught by the institution doesn't make it any less valuable if it fits the Bloom's taxonomy level and provides artifacts and other demonstration of learning that are in alignment with the traditional and institutional program courses. We are also encouraging the institutions to include learning for industry certification exams in their certificate and degree coursework, incorporation of industry tools so that students can get comfortable with what industry is using so that they are prepared for their workforce environments. And in today's world, with everything so much online, having those tools in an online course really helps prepare them properly for success in the workplace. We are also encouraging work-based learning opportunities online and face-to-face that include apprenticeships, internships, and consulting projects for credit and pay so that they are contributing to organizations while they are also earning and learning. And to further the evolutions of our K-12 and post-secondary institutions, one of the newest initiatives we are working on through legislation is Colorado's regional collaborative approach towards workforce development. The initiative proposes that in each of Colorado's 8 regions, we will convene leaders from multiple areas, including industry and business, K-12 education, post-secondary education, nonprofits, and economic development agencies. Working together, the leaders will identify their region's biggest challenges that can be solved or effectively mitigated through workforce development initiatives. And once that list is created, the state will entertain proposals created by those stakeholders and others that have identified workforce development as solutions to address one of the region's top priorities. The proposals will then be evaluated, scored, and most importantly, awarded funds to implement, track, and account for the proposed education and training solution and its performance against mitigating the region's identified priorities. And important to today's discussion, those solutions are expected to heavily rely on e-learning, given the widespread geography of Colorado, the breadth of its talent development needs, and the ease needed for our Colorado residents to keep them continually learning and upskilling. In closing, the highly dynamic and multifaceted challenges we are now facing have fortunately come at a time when technology-mediated learning is indeed a real and accountable solution. And Andrew, I now turn the floor back to you for questions.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Good. Thank you, Dr. Becky. Now, we have about 10 minutes left for questions, as I know that we've introduced many fascinating subjects here that can be discussed. So I should hand it to the floor to see. I'm not sure what system. Do we have someone with a microphone that can take on someone with a question? Do we have any questions from the floor? Well, while you are all contemplating this, I would like to ask my first to Dr. Andreas. We've heard a lot about the importance and the momentum of e-learning. Do you feel that the momentum's coming from the bottom up or from the top down? Is it from students or is it from institutions?
Andrew, I think that's a really important question. I do think you need both sides. You need that demand and that ownership of learning, what I want to learn, how I want to learn, where I want to learn, when I want to learn. But you also need systemic platforms. One of the issues that we have in the past is a highly fragmented market for e-learning, a highly fragmented technology. If you as a professor or a teacher have to deal with 3, 4 solutions that do not share data and so on, you're not going to engage with this. So you need actually, I think, a quite strategic, coordinated, interoperable system. And then absolutely the demand will come from the floor. And at the moment we have a very monopolistic environment in this field, in the field of education. Universities are great in bundling content, delivery, and accreditation. With that combination, then they can extract enormous money from individuals. Technology is going to unravel this. Content is available anywhere. Actually, I think the e-learning university that Dr. Leilak talked about is a great example. Content is available to anyone. Delivery, you're going to see happening in many different ways, in many different places. And accreditation, that's the holy grail. I do believe that's, again, where the systemic perspective is so important. Can we create a currency of skills which people can accumulate in different places at different times, rather than having institutions that award you a degree for 4 years of learning? And I think there we do need a really strong kind of leadership and a systemic perspective to have actually then the demand playing out in a meaningful way.
Thank you. And Dr. Sopi, we talked about the importance of the private sector and the public sector working together. Do you have any examples in your experience of when this has come together well? Is Dr. Sopi there?
Andrew, I'm afraid I didn't quite get
The question was really about the importance of
the full question.
The importance of the private sector and the public sector working together in this field. Would you like to give us any specific examples of where the private sector and the public sector have worked together to create e-learning solutions?
I think I got the gist of your question. There's a bit of a sound problem. I hope you're hearing me all right. Well. If it's about examples, private partners coming together with public authorities. I think we have excellent examples from the Global Education Coalition that UNESCO mobilized in response to the educational disruption as of March. that brought together a range of partners, some UN development partners, some civil society, some research partners, but also a whole range of private partners that came in, all bringing in some profit, some not for profit, but all bringing in the initial crisis that all countries were confronted with, this unplanned and sudden shock to the system. Each brought in, their expertise and their experience. And there are some good examples of how that was with the brokering role that UNESCO played, that how that was brought to help respond, for example, in Senegal, and it had to do in different ways. It could have been telecom companies with zero-rated data. It was also through access to devices, in some cases, training in some basic digital skills. So there are some very good examples. I think the idea of public and public education, the notion of public education in today's world, and it's not only because of the COVID, is to be understood not necessarily as a public service and publicly provided uniquely, but that it is education that is at the service of the public. And we need the range of partners involved to contribute, each with their expertise and their area, their spaces of action to this collective effort. So we do have some examples of telecom or edtech companies joining forces and supporting some of the public responses to the educational disruption in 2020.
Thank you. I think Dr. Andreas, you'd like to follow up on something.
Yeah, no, Andrew, I do believe we need to move from a culture of public versus private, where we have, public universities, private universities, to a culture of public with private. We need public education systems that are powered by the best ideas, by the best technologies. And I think we're still quite far away from this. We still have siloed, parallel worlds that do not integrate well.
No, I think that's an important point to emphasize. Now, just a final question to Dr. Becky. You have students all over the world. I'm interested to know what lessons you have learned that could be used here in the Middle East as a whole, or specifically in Saudi Arabia.
I'm sorry, that question cut out.
Let me mention it again. You are used to dealing with students from all over the world. I'm interested to see if you have any lessons that you have learned with e-learning that you could say would be useful for people in Saudi Arabia to take.
Yes, definitely bring in experts. I believe in private-public partnerships. You need the best technicians, IT, the most advanced, also for cybersecurity. So the integration of private-public partnerships for that is crucial. And a culture of experimentation, piloting, the ability to fail fast and get back on, look at that data and go back in and try again to make something successful. When you're using technology, with everything being so new, and we don't know what students, how they will react, what the faculty will do with it, you've got to try and you have to move quickly, and then you have to get in and look at the data and work to improve the data. So it is a culture of experimentation, and that it is okay to fail as long as you fail quickly, and that you continually innovate and improve so that in fact you are achieving the goals that you originally set out through the incorporation of technology mediated tools and learning.
That is an inspirational way to end this debate, I think. It's okay to fail. We have to keep learning, keep going, keep trying. Well, thank you for a fascinating debate. We've heard the positives of e-learning, the scale, the speed, the capacity, We know of the threats, the cost, the inequality possibilities if it's not done right. It only leaves me to ask everyone to put their hands together for our three panelists, Dr. Andreas, Dr. Sophia, and Dr. Becky. Thank you very much indeed. I think there's a lot for us all to contemplate over our lunch, but for now I will hand over to our moderator.
أصحاب
Your Excellencies, dear guests, now Mr. Jim Brigadier, the General Manager of Blackboard, talking about education redefined, mastering digital transformation. شكرا لك. مساء الخير جميعا.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Brigadier. I'm President Global Markets with Anthology. You may know us as Blackboard, but if you were not aware, just about 3.5 months ago, Blackboard merged with Anthology to form a new company called Anthology. So that brand was only about 15 months in the making, and we now serve 150 million users around the globe. And on top of that, our 4,000 employees support institutions in over 80 countries right now. It's almost close to 90 now. So without further ado, I'm going to forward. Can I get this to forward? Having trouble with the clicker. There we go. It's a little slow. All right. And first of all, I do want to say it's an absolute honor to be around such brilliancy when it comes to the academic and business community here around the globe, and for being in the kingdom here. Thank you to the Saudi Electronic University and Dr. Al Safadi for supporting this. This is a fantastic event so far, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the afternoon. In today's session, I'm going to share with you our unique perspective of really where the next move is with education technology. And as we're all aware, we're in a big-time transformational phase right now, but it's been accelerated by the global pandemic, as we all know. And I also want to say thank you to everybody for being so involved with the transformation of education, because together we're all transforming lives. We're making a big change around the globe, and I know that we're able to change that narrative by our focus. This conference brings a lot to that. Okay, so if you look at this digital transformation survey, this is a longitudinal view that came from a recent U.S. conference amongst chief information officers this past October. And if you notice this, you can look in the far bottom left and the bottom right. This survey in 2019 and again taken in 2021 were taken just before the pandemic and just actually in the midst of the pandemic just a few months ago. Now, granted, this is about 85% U.S. CIOs, but there are some global ones that were involved in this survey. And what's really telling is, if you look at the statistics, how many really are involved in engaging in transformation at their institution. And if you look just a couple of years ago, thank you, just a couple of years ago, it's now tripled since then. And if you look at the total number of people, about 90% or institutions that are actually focused in advancing and transforming around digital learning and e-learning content. So a lot's changed just in 2 years, as we would suspect. All right, I think this is working. This is the Harvard Business Review, and it should be coming up here momentarily. And this is around the innovation ed tech is marked. The way Harvard Business Review qualifies this is what's called punctuated equilibrium. These are long periods of relatively slow change interspersed with occasional momentum bursts of adaptation of technology. Has anybody heard that before? So it's kind of like sprints, and then it will slow down for some time. And if we consider seeing today in the timeline of ed technology evolution, we can find some helpful context that can put this through the history of ed tech and innovation. So let's take a look at the timeline. The first phase began really back in the information time frame, or in the information age back in the 1960s, and really went for about 2.5 decades. I know most of you are young in this room, I can tell, but if you were alive in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, you experienced a age called retrofitting. If you remember retrofitting, a lot of technology was developed outside of education, but used primarily in education. So examples like that might be, for example, the projector, or the headsets that were used, even modern typewriters. Those are examples during the retrofitting phase. Then if you consider technologies, stuck, okay, there we go. And if you consider education technology that moved to the emergence phase really started in the 80s, and that's when everything around this phase was developed specifically on those 3-letter acronyms that you hear, LMS, CRM, SIS. These were invented for education, specifically for education, and this really began the proliferation of how institutions were able to communicate to their students. And this trend really continued all the way up really till about 2010. And at that point, it moved to a next big punctuation moment, which is characterized by the emergence phase and then going to the proliferation phase. This is really the advent of personalized data, much of which came from, if you think about it, personal devices, and especially around apps. So I was actually at dinner last night with some folks from SEU. We were talking about the apps. The apps were a great thing, and it created a lot of business around the globe. A lot of business spurned from this adaptation here during this phase. But these were primarily single-unit tools, and where institutions struggled, and I know in the United States in particular, struggled around how to piece all this together. You've got a lot of data, but you have to go to different systems in order to get that data. Now, this is also where a lot of data started coming together, but it created a patchwork around data stories, and that made it complex in piecing all this. So then at the very end of this proliferation, the pandemic sparked an adoption of ed tech that the world has never seen before, and on a scale the world has never seen before. And this really goes to some slides we have right here that's specific on the kingdom here in Saudi Arabia alone. These are numbers that we recently pulled that came out of the recent pandemic, and you can see the huge upticks around LMS and also around classroom use. I mean, these numbers are staggering. And again, this is just in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the snapshot here only represents just a small fraction of your overall technology investment. So think about how much more is out there. And every part of the learner's journey became online. Whether it's inside or outside of the classroom, everything became online. It's a big advent, a big change, and a big disruptive moment. So suddenly all this disparate data sources that were created during the previous proliferation phase now had indefinitely touch points around the data side, the data silos and the data points. And so where do we go from here? This is where it really creates the next step in the evolution called what we're calling holistic. And this is where anthology strongly believes the market is going. So in this phase called the holistic phase, this will solve the challenges that the proliferation phase created with the tools that benefit from the cross-solution interoperability between all the systems. This is the phase that actually puts the learner's success and the learner itself right in the center of everything that's done, and considers a learner as somebody that's got their own goals, their own preferences, their own personalities. Everything is unique and revolves around that unique, specific learner, pulling from all those data sources. And this phase will truly become, and we believe we're already in the early stages of this phase, holistic. They don't exist in one particular solution. You're pulling them from that SIS, from that CRM, from that ERP. You're also pulling them from the virtual classroom and all the mobile apps and everything that you're driving in between. You're really driving towards understanding that student in every way possible. And if you think about it, We actually have institutions that we serve now that start going after those future students right at birth. Right when they see that a parent who may have graduated from that institution is now in the workforce, maybe perhaps they're married, they have a child. We have some institutions that are already looking at that, and they're sending a little baby outfit to that baby that's born from alumni parents, moving into the fact that when they go into kindergarten or in high school, another gift is sent. They're building that relationship, and they're building those nudges and touches at a very early stage. And that's why we like to say that we support, as everybody here in education technology, from birth to bequest. It's really a lifelong journey of learning, as we all know. And this leads us to the anthology mission. So this is a little bit about our mission that ties into what we do. Specifically, this is about data-formed experiences that really focus on the learner and that we help the learner achieve their goals. And we believe we're in the precipice right now of an educational mindset change, and it sets the future state of where we're going, particularly around how to harness the data. So now we as a single business, but right now fairly large, and if you look at us as the second largest ed tech in the world by amount of revenue, but as clients we've got 9,000, would put us number one. We feel like that's our social mandate. That really is our raison d'etre, what drives us in everything we do. And this holistic phase is going to unlock the learner's success as we go forward. This is really all about our goals and our KPIs within our organization. But it really comes down to, what does all this mean? It comes down to what we feel is intelligent experiences. We see something around intelligent experiences as we go through the moments that synthesize the data across the ed tech ecosystem. So again, this creates relevant interactions. If you think about it, AI, artificial intelligence, has really improved over the last decade. I think most of you probably follow that. The modernization of that, especially with our partner, one of our partners, Microsoft, has really made significant strides in artificial intelligence. If you look at that in the future, where it's going is, what student needs help? How do they need help? Who calls them? Even when it comes to recognition of voice, some students react better towards a female voice, some towards a male voice, some like speaking with younger helpers or supporters on the campus, and some with older, more mature experience. How do we capture those? How does that person call? When do they call? What time of day do they call? How do they get them help? And specifically when, and what are those tools or modalities that help that student learn to a greater extent? That's really where we're focused, and that's what we believe this aggregation of data, the institutions own the data, but aggregating that data through all these tools with the multiple touches, interactions, is going to drive the future of education. In addition to these intelligent experiences, I can tell you that we look at it too as this will help the professors that help those students learn. So it's not just about the institution itself, but it's about those that come in contact. So Anthology Solutions, this is kind of how we see the ecosystem. This is more about what we see as proliferating through with these intelligent nudges and touches and experiences with the student. The holistic view of the learner is possible through all of these. We call them learning, operations, and engagement. And particularly with engagement, this is where it's very sharp. It's not just about a CRM or an SIS. I mean, those are some of the tool sets that we focus on. But it's about more than that. It's about interactions that are captured across the continuum that we're seeing emerge very quickly. And our solutions keep these education experiences both inside and outside the classroom, pulling from all data sources. And again, the institutions that drive this most effectively by harnessing data will be the survivors at the end. In fact, when I talk to a number of leaders across not only the US, but in other countries, their big question mark and how they really drive toward the future is how to harness that data when you have so many different platforms, so many different solutions. And the institutions that can drive all of that together to give a more holistic viewpoint will be the ones that end up being successful. I know that in many areas of the globe right now, there are institutions that have chosen not to go by that direction, especially when it comes to the advent of online learning. There's very few and far between these days, but it's been a hard go for many of them, and some of them have actually struggled to maintain their business throughout the last several years through this pandemic. So the pandemic has created a disruptive force. We've seen these before. We've seen them proliferate beyond the last 50, 60 years, but this one is more acute, and we're seeing more of a change faster and more boldly than we've ever seen before. So this is going to be where our focus is going forward, and really putting the learner at the centerpiece of what we do and how we drive towards success around the globe on the academic side. So thank you very much. We appreciate you listening to our viewpoint of where we're going, and everything that we do going forward will be learner-centric, and specifically around how we improve that modality for the learner and the experiences they have. We see that as the centerpiece of education going forward. Thank you very much.
أصحاب المعالي، أصحاب السعادة، أصحاب المعالي، نستأذنكم بتكريم الرعاة الفضيون. تتشرف سعادة رئيسة الجامعة بتكريم الرعاة الفضيون. الرعاة الفضيون شركة ألوشن ممثلة بسعادة الأستاذ هاني الشاذلي نائب رئيس شركة ألوشن لمنطقة الشرق الأوسط. شركة الصروح الذكية
The company
سعادة
of
شركة الصروح الذكية
الذكية
ممثلة بسعادة
represented by His Excellency Professor Khalid bin Abdul Aziz Al Fleh, the manager of the company.
دار النشر في إكسفورد
Publish House of Oxford represented by Mr. Ahmed Al-Kahkani, the regional manager of Oxford Publishing Press.
أصحاب المعالي، أصحاب السعادة،
Your Excellency and dignified guests, now the collaboration and the agreement going to be signed. The first agreement is going to be a collaborative memorandum.
مذكرة تعاون بين الجامعة السعودية للإلكترونية.
Memorandum of cooperation between SEU and Al Bilad Bank, represented by Her Excellency Leilek As-Safdi, the Rector of the Electronic University, on behalf of the university, and the CEO Abdulaziz bin Mohammed, representative of Al Bilad Bank.
شكرا.
Thank you.
المذكرة الثانية مذكرة تعاون بين الجامعة
The
الإلكترونية والمؤسسة العامة.
The second agreement between the SEU and the another institution of water, the CEO Mohammed bin Hamad Al Bloui, and the deputy of the company of water, Mr. Abdulaziz Al Babtain, representing this institution.
مذكرة تعاون بين
Now,
الجامعة
a
السعودية
memoranda of
الإلكترونية
cooperation
والهيئة
between
الملكية لجبيل
the
وينبع.
Royal
سعادة وكيل
Commission
الجامعة
of
لشؤون
Jubail and
الدكتور
Yumba and
محمد بن
SEU
حسين بالحارث،
of
ممثلاً عن
Mr.
الجامعة.
Mohammed bin Hussein Al
وسعادة
Harith
مساعد
representing
رئيس
the
الهيئة الملكية
university
لجبيل
and his
وينبع
deputy of the
الأستاذ
Royal
بدر بن
Commission
عبد
of Jubail
المحسن
and
آل
Yumba,
الشيخ ممثلاً عن الهيئة.
Mr. Abdulaziz Al Sheikh representing the Commission.
أصحاب المعالي
Your Excellencies,
والسعادة، الحضور الكريم،
our dignified guests,
تتشرف شركة Blackboard.
the company of a Blackboard is honored to present a souvenir celebrating 10 years of the strategic partnership with the SEU.
أصحاب المعالي والسعادة،
Your Excellency, our dignified guests on success ways, we are aspiring for ambitions, and we are meeting in this great country, and peace be upon you.
الحضور الكريم، الحضور الكريم، الآن تشرفوا بتناول طعام الغداء في القاعة المجاورة.